In this video, I'll demonstrate how to integrate InTouch Edge HMI trained worksheets with the Wonderware Historian. So first I'll provide a quick overview about the architecture, then a quick demonstration from scratch how to create a project and integrate it from InTouch Edge HMI with Wonderware Historian, and then I'll review the main steps and provide some troubleshooting tips at the end. The overview is that from InTouch Edge HMI running one or multiple stations, you can configure trained worksheets to save history data and retrieve history data as well from one or multiple Wonderware Historians running on the same or remote computers. This solution works since System Platform 2012 R2 and InTouch Edge HMI 2014 R2. But in this demo for the tutorial, we are using System Platform and InTouch Edge HMI 2017 Update 3. InTouch Edge HMI provides this native integration with Wonderware Historian in its full runtime edition for Windows Desktop and Server, as well as in the Embedded View edition for Windows Embedded Standard and Windows IoT Enterprise as well. From an internal architecture point of view, it's quite simple. InTouch Edge HMI runtime connects to a component called Studio Database Gateway, which runs typically locally on the same computer where InTouch Edge HMI is running. And by default, this connection is done through the TCP port 3997. And also by default, when you launch InTouch Edge HMI runtime, it automatically runs the Studio Database Gateway. The Studio Database Gateway then connects to Wonderware Historian on the same computer or in a remote computer by default through the TCP port 32568, and then uses this connection to save and retrieve data from Wonderware Historian. Very simple configuration. Now let's see in the real world how it works. I'm using another tool from AVEVA here called Integration Studio to launch VMs on the cloud and use those virtual machines to demonstrate the solution, but obviously it would use if the system is locally installed in local computers as well. So to start here, I will go to Wonderware Utilities and go to the configurator. And here in Historian Server, I have already configured the Historian Server with the default settings here in my computer. But just after installing the Historian once in your computer, you would have to at least review those settings and click configure at least once. Here for security, if you know the authentication information, username and password from users that have access to Wonderware Historian, you can use them. Otherwise, you can create new users. Like for instance, I can create here Edge test as a new user, define a password for it, say OK, and configure to add this Edge test user for my tests here. And the search has already been configured as well. So this should suffice for the configurator there. Just to make sure that the Wonderware Historian is running, I can go to the System Platform Management Console, SMC, launch it here, and then come here to Historian, Historian Group, Node 1, Node 1 is the name of my computer, in your case would be the name of your computer, Management Console, any status, making sure that all the modules are started with a green icon here, which means it should be running and ready for a remote client to save data to it. Okay, good enough. Now I'm gonna launch InTouch Edge HMI configuration environment, the development environment. Very well, and I'll create a brand new project called Wonderware Historian test. Pick any license type here. Go through the wizard. I will disable the security system just to focus on the integration with Wonderware Historian, but for real-world projects, you should enable the security system regardless of the integration with Wonderware Historian. And here under tasks, I right-click on the trend worksheet to insert a new worksheet. Define the tags I want to save, like for instance, in my case here, tag A. I'll save it as an integer. And I can save based on a period of time, or I can say save on tag change. So for this example, I will enable only the option save on tag change. So every time tag A changes beyond the dead band, which are leaving blank, so whenever tag A changes from any value to any new value, I want to save the updated value to the historian. Here in the history format, I will change from proprietary to historian. And here in historian configuration, I'll define the server name. In this case is a local computer called node1. The username, in this case we created a user called Edge test, and the password. I can enable historian forward if I want to have this capability just by checking this checkbox. And here in prefix, if you want to use a standard prefix for all the tags saved from this InTouch Edge HMI trend worksheet to the Wonderware Historian, you can just either hard code a prefix here or configure a tag between curly braces. So for now, just save this worksheet. I do not need even a graphical interface to make it work. So I'm gonna disable here the viewer task. So when I run the application, it doesn't show any graphical interface. And here in the output window, I'll go to settings and enable database messages, as well as insert date time. So it shows all the messages between Touch Edge HMI and the Studio Database Gateway, which by default will run locally on my local computer, listening to the port 3997. Good enough. I can save it. I can start the InTouch Edge HMI runtime. I have no errors on the output window. And if I go to Windows tray bar, it shows here that the TCP/IP server has been started. And I use database py to change a value for tag A. For instance, change the value 10. When we do that, the trained worksheet will try to connect to the Studio Gateway, which was automatically launched here. I can unhide it and go to log here and enable to show the log, and here in options, enable to show all the messages with timestamp. Very well. I can even go to window here and say always on top and change again the value for tag A, for instance, from 10 to 20. And you see here the messages from the gateway saving data automatically to the Wonderware Historian. So the data was saved successfully. Can change here to 30 and see data saved successfully, 50, and so on and so forth. Now, if I use a historian tool, like I can go to Wonderware Historian, and for instance, let's use the query tool. Can minimize here the Studio Database Gateway. The tag A is automatically available here, as you see there. And here in SQL, I can customize a SQL statement like select everything from dbo.history where tag name like tag A. Let's see the results here, and you see values here from previous tests and current tests as well. If I go here, order by date time descending, you see the recent values 10, 20, 30, and 50. And if I go there to InTouch Edge HMI and change the value 100. Go back to the query, SQL data. Now you see the value 100. So it's that simple and easy to configure InTouch Edge HMI to save data to Wonderware Historian. Now just some troubleshooting tips. From installation point of view, you just need to install the Wonderware Historian, part of system platform, along with the Microsoft SQL Server database that should be installed along with Wonderware Historian. And InTouch Edge HMI either on the same computer or on the runtime computer or computers where you want to run it. The main configuration for the Historian is under Wonderware Utilities Configurator to make sure that the Historian is up and running and you have the correct security settings. And from InTouch Edge HMI, you just need to configure the trained worksheets and make sure that during the runtime, the background task and the Studio Database Gateway runs. And to check, you need to make sure that InTouch Edge HMI can connect to Wonderware Historian through the TCP port 32568 by default, or whatever you configured for the Wonderware Historian, that the InTouch Edge HMI background task can connect to the Studio Database Gateway, typically locally, through the TCP port 3997 by default, that the security that the status for the Wonderware Historian on the SMC indicate that the Historian is up and running, and that the security settings configured in Wonderware Historian match the security settings for authentication configured in InTouch Edge HMI. And like I showed in the tutorial, use the built-in tools in InTouch Edge HMI and Studio Database Gateway to monitor the connection with Wonderware Historian and troubleshoot based on the error messages, if any, that you see there. With that, we conclude this tutorial, and I hope it's useful for you. Thank you.